Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar this evening. We're really excited to have you with us to talk about sugar and cancer. If you don't mind just locating your chat box, please share with us where you're tuning in from. What city are you from? We'd love to know. Charlotte, North Carolina, Gilbert, Arizona, New York City,
Awesome.
Dublin,
Woohoo, Ireland,
New Zealand,
England.
Malaysia.
Oh,
Wow.
man.
Amazing.
Hello.
Tuning in from very far away. All right,
Mhm.
we're going to go ahead and get started. So we have a lot to discuss today. I do want to let you know that we are all tuning in from the Create Cures Foundation Clinic. If you aren't already familiar, it is Dr. Walter Longo's nonprofit clinic that he founded, and we are a team of registered dietitians as well as the molecular biologists that work to implement his research as well as the research done by his colleagues directly into clinical practice. As I'm sure many of you know, it can sometimes take 12, 15 years for there to be the trickle down effect of research being implemented and utilized by clinicians directly with patients. And so we work to bridge that gap and collaborate to offer comprehensive strategies that are integrative for each individual patient. My name is Jessica Harrison. I'm the clinical coordinator at the Create Cures Foundation Clinic. We also have Katie Reines and Eva Coles with us this evening, who will also be presenting. Before we begin, I would love to know what you think. Is it healthy to include carbohydrates in your diet when trying to treat cancer? If you don't mind locating your chat box, you can share your answer in the chat. The Q&A box is going to be reserved for questions that we will answer live during the last 10 to 15 minutes of the webinar. So for any sort of interaction throughout the webinar this evening, please use the chat box. If you have questions that you want us to answer, please let them be a little bit broader and not specific to your particular case. You can pop those in the Q&A box and we will address them at the end. Okay, so some of the responses depends on the carbohydrate, complex carbohydrates, not processed, unrefined carbs, fruits, veggies, legumes. Awesome. Yes. Okay. Got an educated crowd. All right. So just to briefly review what we will be speaking about today, we're going to quickly talk about sugar and cancer, why it's relevant, why we want to delve into this topic. We'll talk about the different types of carbohydrates, how that relates to cancer research. We'll talk about recommendations related to glucose regulation. We'll talk about lifestyle factors to consider in a daily longevity diet that can help to support any sort of cancer treatment, cancer remission, preventing reoccurrence. And then we will finish with a quiz, so make sure to pay attention. And then we will answer any questions that you have during the last 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, so we're all here this evening to talk about the relationship between sugar and cancer. I am sure that many of you have heard that sugar feeds cancer. And although this is fairly true, it is not the only cancer growth factor. So that is important to remember. Glucose is essentially a source of fuel for cancer. So regulating glucose, making sure that you have a healthy A1C, which we will be speaking about multiple times this evening. It relates to an average of your glucose over the course of 3 months, making sure that that is healthy insulin levels can really support cancer treatment as well as outcomes and preventing reoccurrence. You might have also heard that many cancers are considered a metabolic disorder because there have been strong associations that have been made with dysregulated glucose metabolism. That could look like elevated glucose, elevated insulin, decreased insulin sensitivity, meaning the cells aren't sensitive to the message that insulin is trying to share with the cells of letting glucose in and utilizing it for energy. different types of sugar and carbs have a different effect on cancer cells. So many of you already alluded to in the first question, candy or Fruit Loops, for example, are going to affect cancer cells very differently than brown rice or a sprouted whole grain. As I mentioned, glucose isn't the only cancer growth factor. IGF-1, which stands for insulin-like growth factor 1 and is related to protein intake, as well as leptin, a hunger hormone, insulin, another hormone messenger, and ketone bodies can also be used as a cancer growth factor. So many times people think, okay, sugar is the devil. I want to avoid it at all costs. I want to follow a low carbohydrate diet. I want to follow the keto diet. Well, swinging to the opposite end of the spectrum also might not be a healthy idea. It depends on the cancer. It depends on the mutation within the cancer as to whether ketone bodies could actually help the cancer to grow. And diabetes, primarily type 2, is associated with an increased risk for many different types of cancer. Just reiterating what I had shared about cancer being potentially a metabolic disease. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Eva, who's going to dive into talking about carbohydrates and the different types of carbs.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks, Jessica. So as you know, my name is Eva, and I'm really excited to be here to talk to you a little bit about carbohydrates. I'm sure everyone here, there's some conflicting views on this food group. So I wanted to take a deep dive and tell you all about what they are and how they impact your blood sugar levels and your health, and why there is so much nuance on this topic. And it really will depend on the type of carbohydrate when we're talking about cancer. And Katie's going to go into that more specifically after this. So let's start with talking about what carbohydrates really are. So they're one of the 3 macronutrients along with protein and fat. And at their most basic form, they are just sugar molecules. Our body breaks down carbohydrates into glucose or blood sugar, and glucose is the simplest form of sugar, and it's the main source of energy for our cells, tissues, and organs. So it is pretty important for our bodies to function. And this here on the right, you'll see is what the actual molecule looks like. I think it's really interesting to see it in action pretty much, and I think it's really pretty. It's also important, I think, to understand carbohydrates because their consumption influences your blood glucose and insulin levels and ultimately your health. So this is why it's really great to learn about it and just know really what you're putting into your body so you can be more empowered with the food choices that you make in the future. And so I want to start with a question, and you can feel free to answer in the chat box. So what is the difference between a complex carbohydrate and a simple carbohydrate? If you know, I would love to see what you have to say. And I'm going to go into the answer right after this. Yeah, that's close, just fiber, but fiber. Okay. Complex breakdown slowly, yes, while simple breakdown faster. Great, I love that answer. It's about the carbon bond. I mean, yeah, that's really technical, but you're not off there. Okay, great. So moving on, yes, basically carbohydrates are categorized based on their structure. So simple carbohydrates are just going to be shorter chains of sugar molecules, so they're going to be broken down more quickly. And complex carbohydrates are going to be longer molecules, so they take longer for your digestive system to break down. And those are like, and sugars are going to be found in fruits, but mostly fruit juices and processed foods, whereas complex carbohydrates like starches, which are potatoes and root vegetables and grains, or fibers, which are more leafy green vegetables and plenty of other things. And I'm going to go into detail into those in just a second. So starting with sugars, sugars are a simple carbohydrate, and they're the simplest form of carbohydrate. They're easily digested, as I mentioned before, and fast acting. So they provide a quick release of glucose in the blood, and they provide quick energy if you do ever need quick energy. But that is also important because you need to know that this can cause a rush. This rush can cause a spike in blood sugar and insulin, which may lead to a crash. And so this is something that you might already know about simple sugars. And sugars can occur naturally in fruit juices. They can occur naturally in fruit juices, in fruits, in some sweeteners like honey or maple syrup, in dairy products in the form of lactose, or, as you know, often in refined and processed foods as added sugars, which is something we always want to avoid. And they generally contain 4 calories per gram. So moving on to starches, which are a complex carbohydrate. They're actually the storage form of energy in plants, and they are longer molecules, so they do break down more slowly, and our digestive system will break them down more slowly than sugars. So there will be a more stable and slower release of glucose in the blood. But if they're refined, which is something you want to watch out for, then it can cause a rush in, it can cause an increase in blood sugar that's more dramatic, and it can also lead to a crash. So that's why you want to maybe avoid processed and refined foods. And these can generally occur, these starches are generally sourced in whole grains, grain products, legumes, and root vegetables. And finally, fibers, dietary fiber is even more complex, so it's going to be longer chains of molecules, and they are the main component of the cell walls in plants. And these take much longer for our bodies to break down and digest, and they tend to help us feel more full, mainly because in part they're indigestible, so they actually go through our digestive system, helping things move along. And really interesting is that they can be broken down by our gut bacteria, which feeds off of some of these fibers. And I'm going to get into that in a minute. But generally, you'll find fiber also in whole grains, grain products, legumes and root vegetables, and non-starchy vegetables like leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, and other low-sugar fruits, well, all fruits as well, but and seeds especially, like chia and flax seeds, are extremely rich in fibers and so many other beneficial compounds. And here I've just found a very interesting little comparison to show because, while there are 3 primary types of carbohydrates, almost all carb-containing foods, notably whole foods, so whole fruits, vegetables, etc., will contain multiple types. So I just wanted to show you here how you can see that kale is mostly fiber, while apples are mostly sugars, and oats are mostly starch. So I just found that to be really interesting. And here, I'm not going to go into too much detail on digestion, but I just thought it'd be interesting for you to see that how different carbs are digested. So unlike sugars and starches, fiber cannot be fully digested by our digestive tract, and it'll actually be broken down. Some of it can be broken down by the bacteria in our gut, which happens in the large intestine. And that is partially why you might have heard that fiber is good for the gut and the gut microbiome, because it acts to feed the good bacteria in the gut. And that's why it's so important to eat fiber, because these bacteria can create beneficial compounds like short-chain fatty acids and so much more. And now, just as not all calories are created equal, I think it's important to remember that not all sugars are created equal. It really depends on what you're eating. And I wanted to talk to you about how different carb-containing foods can affect your blood sugar depending on how many carbohydrates they contain and what types they contain. And one really helpful tool is the glycemic index. It can give you an idea of how your body will respond to what you're eating. It's pretty much a number value from 0 to 100, describing how fast blood glucose rises after consuming a carbohydrate containing food. So in a way, it's a way to categorize carbs. And low GI foods, as you can see from the graph here, will cause a lower and more steady increase in blood sugar and a steady decrease. So you'll have more sustained energy, whereas high glycemic index foods, such as more simple sugars, will cause a spike in blood sugar, and that can lead to a crash. So you see it's lower than the baseline, and that is what the crash really is in sugar. But while this metric is useful for assessing how quickly food can affect your blood sugar, there is a piece missing, and that is that it doesn't account for how much carbohydrate is in a serving. And that's where the glycemic load comes in. If some of you have heard of this, it's really interesting and helpful because it takes into account the glycemic index and how much carbohydrate is in a serving of a particular food. So it can give you a more realistic picture of how a particular food and the serving of that food will impact your blood sugar. And so it's also important to know, though, that a food might have a high glycemic index, but it will have a lower glycemic load because per serving, it won't actually bring your blood sugar up too much. And a nice example is, a lot of fruits, but like on the right here in the graph, you'll see watermelon in red has a high glycemic index, but a lower glycemic load because per serving, it doesn't actually have too much carbohydrate or sugar. And these are also super helpful tools, but there are so many other factors that can impact how you react and how your blood sugar will react to a certain food. And one is how the food is prepared, which is really interesting, which you might have heard that heating and cooling starches or grains like rice can turn it into a resistant starch, and that'll actually lower the effect on your blood sugar. Another thing is food composition. So if what you're eating has protein or fat added to it, that can also slow down the breakdown of sugar, and it can also slow the release of glucose in your blood. Muscle mass is really interesting as well. If you have more muscle mass, then your glycemic, then you will react differently to certain foods. You'll actually have a lower you may have a lower reaction to carbohydrate containing foods, so your blood sugar will not rise as much. And there's some interesting research to support that as well. And even ancestry, which is very interesting to me, is that depending on your ancestry, you might react to different foods. For instance, comparing rice to, let's say, sweet potatoes, somebody might have a spike in blood sugar eating one, but the other they won't, and vice versa based on their ancestry, which I find to be super, super interesting. And so here, moving on, is a little question I had for you. Do you think it's better to eat fruit or drink fruit juice for your blood sugar? Okay, yes, whole fruit, eat fruit. Great, I love it. You all know your stuff. Okay, so that is completely correct. And I'm going to use this very simple example to explain why. But essentially, here is a medium-sized apple, and you'll see that it has, once you eat it, there will be, again, a gradual increase, which stabilizes and goes and lowers down. So it'll be a stable, sustained, release of energy, and you won't have any crashes. Whereas if you compare it to a glass of apple juice, where there is less fiber, there's actually more calories, more carbohydrates per serving, and less fiber per serving, it can cause a dramatic rise in blood sugar, so a spike, and then a quick crash in blood sugar. And the main reason is because the juicing process the juicing process lowers the content of beneficial phytochemicals, and also, more importantly, removes essentially all the dietary fiber, which slows the digestive process and release of sugar in the blood. And that is why it's much better to eat the whole fruit rather than to drink the juice. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about grains, because similarly to juicing, refining grains also strips them of their beneficial compounds, including their fiber. And naturally, grains actually have bran. So you'll see here on the left, which is intended to protect the seed, and it contains fiber, B vitamins, and minerals. And then there's also the germ, which provides nourishment for the seed, and that contains more B vitamins. It contains vitamin E, minerals, and phytochemicals. So many beneficial and important compounds. And the endosperm, which provides the energy for the seed, is where all the carbohydrates are held, and some protein and some B vitamins, but this part is the part that remains when you refine the grain. So that's why these become more simple carbohydrates, because the fiber is taken out and the bran and the germ are removed, and the endosperm is all that remains when you refine a grain. So if white flour versus whole grain flour will be different because this portion is removed. And so just to get into a little more detail and showing you different grains, I made this graph here to sort of express how we can rank grains based on how they will affect your blood sugar. And essentially, as grains are more processed, their impact on your blood sugar will increase because they become easier to digest, because they've been stripped of all of these things that generally take our digestive system a little more time to break down. And then you'll have a quicker, more dramatic impact on your blood sugar. So at the top, we have sprouted and whole grains, which generally have the lowest impact because they're more difficult to break down. You'll also notice that it takes longer to cook them. So that can just tell you how it'll impact your blood sugar compared to, let's say, quick oats, which cook really quickly because they've been processed to a point where it's much easier to break down. Sourdough bread, I see a question. That will really depend on whether it's whole grain, whether there's seeds added to it. So there's a lot of nuance to that as well. But sourdough bread is generally actually really beneficial because the process of making sourdough bread, the yeast eat away at a lot of the sugar, and it actually can help. But also Katie said she'll address this later, so I'll let her do that. I'd love to hear what she has to say. And yes, just as grains, fruits can also be categorized based on their effect on your blood sugar. So there are some fruits that have more fiber and lower sugar content, like berries, apples, some citrus fruits, and cherries. And then as you go higher to more higher carb containing fruits, like bananas, tropical fruits tend to be higher in sugar content, grapes, watermelon. And then higher up, we have dried fruits, which generally are just very concentrated in sugar, so they can have a higher glycemic index. And then finally, fruit juice, which is essentially stripped of all of its fiber, will just completely spike your blood sugar and cause a crash, just because it's been stripped of its fiber. And finally, just to end my portion, I thought it'd be interesting to just give you a nice visual of the various benefits of complex carbohydrates, including vegetables, grains, nuts and seeds, and whole fruits, because they really play a crucial role in promoting health, not just because of the fiber, but also because of so many beneficial and essential compounds like antioxidants, vitamin C, essential minerals, phytonutrients, and so many more minerals that are necessary for a diet. And that's why you might hear that it's important to eat the rainbow, because all these different colors and shapes, they really just mean that all of these foods that you're eating have different minerals and compounds that your body really needs and can help your body just thrive in so many ways. And so Katie is now going to talk about cancer research related to sugar.
Thank you. Yes, and let's ask this question again. Some of you were a little unsure. Is it healthy to include carbohydrates in your diet when trying to treat cancer? After what has gone, yes. What protects the plant protects us. Ooh, I like that. Yes. Amazing. Yeah. Carbohydrates are important. Of course, this is needed. It needs to be individualized, of course. Some people, as Jessica mentioned, might do better a more keto approach, but in general, yes. As you can see here, I've pulled up some research. It's very, very interesting. This 2020 meta-analysis, whole grain intake was associated with lower risk of total and site-specific cancer, findings supporting current dietary recommendations to actually increase whole grain consumption, increasing that complex carbohydrate consumption. And as Jessica mentioned earlier, yeah, high sugar intake, people might be like, wait, what the heck? You're telling us to increase whole grain consumption? Absolutely bonkers. Because yeah, high sugar, refined sugar intake elevates blood glucose, which yeah, it may increase insulin. Maybe you've seen our other webinars, or maybe you've done some research on your own, hearing of this insulin-like growth factor. When we've got lots of insulin, of course, we want to avoid these refined sugars because these are associated with cell growth and growth factor, right? As you can see from this image, the 2016, I'm going to go over a systematic review and meta-analysis showing that the relative risk of cancer decreases as whole grain intake increases. If you see on the next slide, it's very, very clear, this inverse relationship. Consumption of whole grains, 90 grams per day, as that increases, relative risk of cancer decreases. And this is over, what, 64,000 people? This is a huge meta-analysis. And okay, how can we do this? How can we make our plates balanced so that we're including complex carbs and not spiking any insulin, not spiking any growth factor? I love this plate image, seeing, okay, whole grains taking up about a quarter of the plate, a quarter of the plate being healthy protein, something like peas, pulses, legumes, plenty of vegetables, of course, some fruit, some healthy fat, and some water. And we're going to go over this. Okay, how do we create a healthy plate? I'd love to hear from you on this next slide here. Which plate is going to be more beneficial? Already got an answer here. Which one's going to be more beneficial for our blood sugar? Of course, B. Yes, even if this is a refined white pasta dish, both of these might have white pasta because B includes protein, it includes fiber from these greens and different vegetables. This is going to be a much healthier option. And it also looks like there's some olive oil on there to really help slow down any blood sugar spike. So it's going to be important when you're at home looking through your cupboards. Okay, what can I make for myself? Let's try to give it more food groups, more colors, more variety, so that we can manage our blood sugar a lot better. And similarly with this next one, oatmeal for breakfast. Which one should we go with? Should we just have the plain oats, the plain quick oats, or this? It looks like, yeah, B across the board. See how this is rolled oats. It's got some hemp seeds, some berries, some healthy, it looks like maybe almond butter, right? I hope everybody can take these images. And then when you're looking at your breakfast at home, should I add some berries to this? Can I add some healthy fat, some seeds to this, right? Making this easier for you rather than being like, oh, I need a specific meal plan. You don't, you can do this just by visually. And then roller coaster versus balance. I loved how Eva mentioned, and you can see when the blood sugar, when you take in refined carbohydrates, it's this roller coaster. You're going super fast, up and down, absolute craziness, versus grounded, patient, focused, productive energy from complex carbohydrates. As you can see on the next slide here, this is really common with my patients right now, getting excited about pumpkin spice lattes and the pumpkin baked goods, right? And often these fancy fun drinks are going to be packed with added sugar. Of course, baked goods, refined flours, and added sugars are going to put you on a roller coaster, probably craving more, probably you're going to lead to a spike, being really, really full of energy, and then a crash, feeling like you need to take a nap and you have cravings for more sugar, right? Feeling irritable, feeling maybe even kind of depressed after eating a lot of sugar for breakfast, not being able to focus, versus this balanced oatmeal bowl with some berries, some peanut butter, some apples. This is going to allow us, because of the fiber, because of all the nutrients intact there, we're really going to be able to feel focused throughout the day. Thinking about how important is it really to include carbohydrates in prevention of cancer, there's a lot of research. This first one that I have listed, the gut microbiome composition, is a huge aspect of why complex carbohydrates are so important. Gut microbiome composition is linked to whole grain induced immune improvements. You can really improve your immune system from your gut microbes. So it's so important to feed your gut microbes with complex carbohydrates because those are a great source of fiber, right? As Eva mentioned. Secondly, significant reduction in risk from death from all causes of death are reduced. This was a meta-analysis showed that whole grain intake was associated with an increased risk of death, of course, all causes, and this includes total cancer. Absolutely fascinating, eating more whole grain intake. The third one listed, glycemic control and diabetes prevention and reversal. I think this is fascinating. 2020 systematic review and meta-analysis. I have got to quote this. Those with all types of diabetes should be encouraged to intake adequate fiber. Vegetables, pulses, whole fruits, and whole grains are excellent sources. And there is no suggestions from cohort studies or controlled trials that relatively high intake of these complex carbohydrate rich foods are associated with deterioration of glycemic control or weight gain. So across the board, really recommending. And then lastly, improvement of lifespan. The centenarians, people in the blue zones, people who live to be healthy around 100 years old, those people are actually eating a bunch of complex carbohydrates. So yeah, please don't be afraid of these complex carbs. Now that I've ranted about all of these studies, please tell me, I hope you learned something. Why is it important to include quality carbohydrates in our daily diet? Now hungry for plate B. That's funny. Does anybody know why is it important? Slows down sugar uptake. Interesting. Okay. Thank you for answering. Is everyone stumped? Why is it important to include quality carbohydrates? High vitamins and minerals? High in fiber. There we go. The fiber. Yeah, it's important because it's been shown to reduce risk of all causes of death. Yeah. Okay, amazing. Improves longevity. Yes, microbiome. Great job, everybody. Now, there was a question about sourdough bread. And how do we connect the dots here? How can we actually take the information from this webinar and implement it into our daily life? When looking for grain products, including sourdough bread, pasta, cereals, please look at the nutrition facts label, and we're going to do a little exercise together and look at the total carbohydrate. If you see that first red arrow, the total carbohydrate in comparison to the dietary fiber. And we want to look for 5 grams of total carbohydrate to about 1 gram of fiber. Look for a 5-to-1 or less ratio for these grain products. There's also looking at the ingredients label. As you were saying, somebody asked, what about sprouted whole grain flour? If that's the first ingredient, whole grain, 100% organic whole grain flour, fantastic, because the weight, the thing that's listed first is what makes up the most weight of that product. So you really don't want to see any added sugars, any brown rice syrups or anything like that, high fructose corn syrup. You definitely do not want to see those, especially within the first 5 ingredients. Okay, and looking for these different labels can help show that it's a whole grain. Lastly, on this slide, if you look at the added sugars, it didn't used to be that you could see the added sugars on the label. Let's make sure that there's 0 to 4 grams of added sugar to prevent a blood sugar spike. All right, on this seemingly healthy product, a lot of people purchase this product thinking it's healthy. Looking at the total carbohydrate, see where the red arrows are. The total carbohydrate is 34 grams. The dietary fiber is 3 grams, if we can see this. And then looking at the next slide, I have a question for you. Does this product pass this 5-to-1 or less test? No. I know I'm making you do math tonight. No, it doesn't. And no, it doesn't, right? We would need a little bit more fiber for it to pass that test. Exactly. Or a little bit less carbs. And also looking at it makes sense that the ratio is off because it includes 10 grams of added sugar, right? This product does not pass that test. And I want you all to know, this is Kellogg's Special K cereal with strawberries. So a lot of my patients are like, oh, I'm so great, I eat Special K with berries. Hey, this has got 10 grams of added sugar per serving. There's barely any fiber in here. I wouldn't recommend it necessarily, especially for cancer patients. Yeah. Okay, quiz going on here. Which is less likely to spike blood sugar? Product A or product B? Let's take a look at the total carbohydrate. Let's take a look at the fiber. Looking at the added sugars, which is less likely to spike blood sugar? It's a little confusing. Let's ask there. Yeah, you're all doing good. I know it's confusing the way I asked it, but product A is less likely to spike blood sugar, and that's because it has 0 grams of added sugar, and there's 31 grams of total carbs and 5 grams of fiber. So that's a 5-to-1 ratio. Okay, so that's amazing. And these products, product A is the Trader Joe's rolled oats, like rolled oatmeal, and product B is Lucky Charms. And it's pretty obvious which one is healthier, just looking at the label, okay? Just need to look at the fiber content exactly. So one, although it has more carbs and more calories, it definitely has more fiber, less added sugar. And then the next product here, which is less likely to spike blood sugar? Anyone know between these two? And I'm curious if you can guess what these products are. Yeah, product A. Beautiful. Product A contains 3 grams of fiber and 15 grams of total carbohydrate versus product B contains 0 fiber and 30 grams. Yeah, how did you know? Someone guessed it. This one on the left, product A is Ezekiel bread, and then product B is Wonder bread. So having that whole grain is very, very important. Thank you all for participating. And Jessica is going to share more about fasting in regards to sugar and cancer.
Thank you, Katie. Those practical tools are so helpful, and we can take them with us when we go grocery shopping in the future. Okay, now I'm going to pivot to talking about how fasting can be beneficial through the lens of helping to regulate blood sugar regulation. So fasting can significantly decrease fasting glucose as well as your hemoglobin A1C. Maybe you've heard about the benefits of fasting around cancer treatment, fasting beyond treatment, preventing recurrence. It can also help to make cells more sensitive to insulin. So again, that hormone messenger that I was speaking about at the very beginning that essentially acts as the key to unlock cells' doors to let the glucose in to be used for energy. We want insulin levels to be lower because insulin could also be used as a cancer growth factor. We recommend at the clinic the fasting mimicking diet over water-only fasting. And I will go into this on the next slide of what the fasting mimicking diet is and why. So the fasting mimicking diet is a 5-day plant-based low-calorie diet that Dr. Longo, our founder of the clinic, has developed based on 30 years of research. He saw through research how beneficial fasting can be for patients going through cancer treatment, but he noticed that there are a lot of really detrimental side effects of water-only fasting. Number one, it's very hard to comply with. It's very hard to do, but also he saw that it stresses the microbiome and that there are actually negative effects on the microbiome. It can stress the gallbladder. It can increase cortisol levels, which can then increase glucose levels. It can stress the cardiovascular system. So with cancer patients going through active treatment, he was thinking about a way of how to mimic the benefits of fasting while still nourishing the body. And so he developed this diet that allows you to consume the maximum amount of calories and nutrients per day without really pushing and stimulating the nutrient sensing pathways. So essentially it tricks the body into thinking you're fasting while still consuming some nutrients. And what happens as a result is there's this really, really interesting differential stress resistance effect, meaning the healthy cells can sense that there are low levels of energy, glucose circulating around. The healthy cells are able to pivot, start using fat for fuel, and can upregulate a process called autophagy, which essentially is a mechanism of cellular recycling to target and utilize any sort of damaged cellular components or proteins. So the healthy cells can become stronger, and they essentially develop this shield against this toxicity of standard of care treatment, whether that's chemotherapy, radiation. And so we've seen that a lot of patients have significantly less side effects when pairing the fasting mimicking diet with their standard of care treatment. It also sensitizes the cancer cells because it's significantly decreasing the cancer growth factors, including glucose and insulin, so that the cancer cells often have trouble making that pivot to burning fat for fuel. Although I will address, I saw it was a question, it isn't impossible. Some cancer cells can do it. But they generally become weak and even more sensitive to the toxicity of whatever the standard of care treatment is. I do want to add a disclaimer that we only recommend the fasting mimicking diet with your oncologist's approval. Please absolutely, definitely check in with them. This is not something to be done alone. It's something to really be used in a very strategic way. And just another reason why we recommend the fasting mimicking diet over water fasting is because you can see here when they are compared, a 3-day water fast versus 5-day fasting mimicking diet, you can see that a water only fast actually increased glucose levels, and the researchers for this particular study hypothesized that this is likely because it's causing excessive stress on the body. And so there likely is going to be a cortisol spike, which is going to lead to increased glucose levels. We saw that the fasting mimicking diet significantly decreased glucose, insulin, as well as IGF-1 levels. Okay, open up your chat boxes. How can fasting support glucose regulation? Makes you more insulin sensitive. Absolutely. Yeah. So decreases the amount of insulin that needs to be utilized by your body to let in the same amount of glucose. You got it. Exactly. And lowers blood sugar levels. Yes. All right. I do want to also mention, so the fasting mimicking diet is not necessarily the best choice for every patient, and that's something definitely to consider, again, with your oncologist. But in addition, or maybe instead of the fasting mimicking diet, intermittent fasting is something that we absolutely recommend on a daily basis. We recommend 14 hours for any person with cancer, who's at risk of cancer, or who has previously had cancer, to prevent the reoccurrence. I'm sure you've heard anywhere from 8 hours intermittent fasting to 20 hours intermittent fasting. There's a lot of conflicting research out there. We found that 14 hours is really that sweet spot where you're able to maximize the benefits while simultaneously avoiding any sort of the potential risks. There are a lot of studies out there showing how intermittent fasting can be beneficial for cancer patients. It has been shown to decrease risk of cancer reoccurrence. It's been shown to decrease inflammatory markers. Something that I thought was really interesting was one study, with each 10% increase of the proportion of daily calories consumed in the evening, there was a 3% increase in CRP. CRP is C-reactive protein. It's a marker of inflammation. So what this tells us is if you eat the majority of your calories in the evening, close to when you go to sleep, ideally, in this case, it would probably be or theoretically, it probably would be closing that overnight fasting window. It's going to lead to increased inflammation because our bodies have a circadian rhythm. Maybe you've heard your microbiome has a circadian rhythm, and we digest most efficiently in the early evening hours. We are not going to digest efficiently when going to sleep. And we want to utilize our energy while sleeping to be directed towards repairing and regenerating, really rejuvenating the body, not towards inefficiently digesting. Something also that is important to mention is that in the NHANES study, each 3-hour increase in nighttime fasting duration was associated with about a 20% reduction in the risk of having an elevated A1C. So that is absolutely significant, something to consider. So this is a tool that we recommend all of our patients utilize. But again, 14 hours is for people with cancer or who previously had cancer. This is not the window that we would, the intermittent fasting window that we would recommend for the general population. So in addition to intermittent fasting, we recommend a daily longevity diet, which can be followed throughout cancer treatment as well as beyond treatment in preventing reoccurrence. So we recommend a 10-hour eating window, 14-hour fasting window overnight. So if you finish eating dinner at 6, this means that you would have breakfast at 8 a.m. the following day. We recommend leaving about 3 hours between your last bite of food and when you go to sleep. Again, because we want to give your body that time to properly digest, to really leverage the work of the microbiome to help to metabolize nutrients. As Eva walked us through, our microbiome plays a really important role in digestion. And if they're sleeping, theoretically, with the circadian rhythm when we are sleeping, then they're not going to be able to digest appropriately. We recommend primarily plant-based meals, an abundance of different colors, a lot of complex carbohydrates, the omega-3 rich fish that are going to be low in mercury, such as sardines, mackerel, anchovies, salmon, and herring. We recommend a lot of legumes, beans, lentils, peas, vegetables, a serving of fruit. And then also we want to think about different lifestyle factors, because stress, for example, can be a major hidden cause of blood sugar spikes and dysregulation. And Katie actually is going to jump back on here and share a personal story of when this happened or when she noticed this correlation.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, the different nervous system responses that we have. There's one nervous system response that's called rest and digest. And it's literally called rest and digest because we're not able to properly digest our food if we're really stressed out. So this calm parasympathetic nervous system response, our insulin and glucagon are able to control blood glucose levels and actually utilize the foods that we eat properly, versus when we're stressed, we're like, oh no, oh crap, right? Cortisol, that stress hormone, is going to lead to an increase in blood sugar so that we can run from a tiger, making it so that we're in this quote unquote fight or flight response. And this response can occur chronically if people are really stressed at work, maybe with different relationships, stuck in traffic. These things can actually really impact our blood sugar. And as you can see on the next slide, I'm curious what you think caused this blood sugar spike. I was wearing a continuous glucose monitor and I had not eaten. Oh, I'm giving it away. Well, I'm just going to tell you. Yeah, getting stressed. I had not eaten anything, right? I was completely fasted. My blood sugar was in the 90s, and it went from 90 to 190 just from me getting stressed. I didn't realize what time it was, and I was all of a sudden, I gotta go. And my blood sugar spiked. This is the most impressive spike I've ever had. And it's not related to soda, candy, or eating a banana. It's related to stress. So I hope that this image really helps it land for you, that it really, really very much so is very important to prioritize your peace, to notice those little moments when you're stressed and let yourself, okay, wow, take a deep breath and don't sweat the small stuff, because this really does affect your blood sugar levels. Okay.
Thank you, Katie. So interesting, because we can talk about the foods to choose, how you can modulate the context in which you're enjoying your meals, which I will talk about in a moment. But if we aren't regulating our stress and supporting our nervous system, then you could be having that blood sugar roller coaster all day, every day, which absolutely could be contributing to inflammation, to elevated A1C, potentially leading to elevated insulin as well, insulin resistance. So stress regulation is a really important part of this conversation, and really finding the practices that are feasible for you on a daily basis that you really feel connected to, whatever that is, whether that's breath work, mindfulness, going for a walk, calling a friend, cooking, whatever, taking a bath. I mean, there's so many different ways to help to regulate your nervous system, but it is very important to connect to that and to make it a sustainable practice. Okay, so I saw in the chat box earlier on, someone asked, how can we support our blood sugar when maybe eating foods that are richer in carbs, or maybe the foods that do have a little bit of sugar? Does this mean that if you have cancer that you can eat absolutely 1 gram of sugar, that you are going absolutely sugar-free? No, that's not what we would recommend. We want to be mindful about the sources of sugar, making sure that they're whole food based, making sure that they are accompanied with fiber, fat, protein, these components that are digested much more slowly. But there's a way to enjoy them without leading to a blood sugar spike. So that could be doing the pairings that I just spoke about. It could also mean eating your vegetables or fiber first. So because fiber is digested more slowly, essentially it creates this backlog in your digestive system where then your body metabolizes the carbs slower. It has to work through the fiber first to then get to the carbs. So then this can significantly blunt a blood sugar spike. Making sure that you get adequate sleep, high quality sleep, is super important. Even 1 night of poor quality sleep can dysregulate blood sugar. Eating a balanced breakfast is very, very important. Eating a breakfast without even a little bit of protein has been shown to lead to dysregulated blood sugar later on in the day. So making sure that you have some sort of protein, that could even be like a nut butter, hemp seeds, scrambled tofu, something like that, would be a really great idea just to help to stabilize and balance your meal. Manage stress, as we talked about. Also, walking after meals can be hugely beneficial. There was a study done that showed that just 15 minutes of walking after your meals can help to significantly decrease your elevation in blood sugar after eating. And this is because your muscles are one of the main utilizers of glucose. And so every time your muscle fibers contract, they soak up the glucose from your bloodstream. So it's utilizing the glucose before your body has a chance to increase the circulating glucose levels. Also, something that I think is really interesting is that the gastroc, the muscle in your calf, which is used when you're walking, has even more uptake of glucose than the rest of the muscles in your body. So it just essentially shows that we're engineered to walk after we eat. Staying hydrated is really important because, again, if we're thinking about concentration of glucose in your bloodstream, if you're not drinking adequate water, there's going to be higher concentrations of the glucose in your bloodstream. We recommend avoiding liquid calories, just because these are often pure sugar without the fiber, without the protein, without the fat to slow it down. Also, some of you might have heard that apple cider vinegar can be really beneficial. Just 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar in a glass of water before eating a carb-rich meal can help to blunt a blood sugar spike. Also, you could use apple cider vinegar in a vinaigrette over roasted vegetables or a salad that also would have a similar effect. Okay, now we have reached the quiz that I mentioned at the very beginning. I hope that you've been listening and enjoying our discussion. Open up your chat boxes. What should you look for on a nutrition facts label for a grain product like bread or pasta?
You know this, yes.
Yeah, ratio of carbs to fiber. Exactly, yeah.
Organic.
5-to-1. I was just going to say, does anyone know the ratio? That's it. What are complex carbohydrates better for blood sugar control, or why are complex carbohydrates better for blood sugar control over refined or processed carbs? Fiber, they're slower to digest. Yeah, exactly. Slower absorption. That is right. Okay. Number 3, what are 3 blood sugar regulating tips that I just reviewed? Apple cider vinegar. Eat carbs last. Yes. Walking after eating. Yes. Excellent. Pairing carbs with fiber, fat, and protein. Getting adequate sleep. Yes. 10 squats. Love it. Okay, so that concludes the content of what we wanted to share during our presentation today. I did want to reiterate that we are a nonprofit organization, and if you are interested in working with us one-on-one so that we can develop a personalized protocol for you that integrates both nutrition as well as lifestyle, sleep, movement, stress, all of that, then we will share in the chat box exactly the email address where you can reach out to us. It's clinic@createcures.org. We do offer sliding scale fees for those who qualify based on income. So if this is something that you're interested in, we do work to make our offerings as accessible as possible. We provide the option to work with us on a program basis so that we can really develop a strategy and then monitor as you move through treatment or beyond, because anything with treatment, or even people who are generally healthy without any chronic health conditions, life happens. There are different fluctuations in body composition and biomarkers. So we're always looking at what those look like and how we can adapt your diet and lifestyle. Again, this is the email address to reach out to us if you have any interest in scheduling a consultation with one of our dietitians. You can also reach out to us through our website, and you can schedule an introductory 10 to 15-minute call, which is complimentary. We also do recommend that you visit our YouTube channel. This webinar will be saved on that channel, so you can refer back to it as needed. Okay, now let's move over to the Q&A. Wow, oh my gosh, we have 22 questions and we only have 5 minutes. Okay, we're gonna try the best that we can to get through these. If we don't get to your question, I'm really sorry, but please email us and we can try to answer you. Okay, the first one I wanted to address was about ketones and how that relates to cancer. So the question is, a cancer cell mitochondria is damaged and unable to do oxidative phosphorylation, but rather it ferments. So by restricting sugar, you starve cancer cells. A cancer cell is unable to metabolize ketones. Can you confirm if this is true? Great question. So this is not necessarily true. The research around the ketogenic diet in different types of cancer is really, unfortunately, still in its infancy. But what we have seen through quite a few preclinical studies is that ketone bodies have been used as cancer growth factors and have led to the proliferation of cancer cells and growth. Again, it is very dependent on the type of cancer, on the different genetic variations within the cancer cells. So it's very hard for us to make a sweeping claim and say, avoid the ketogenic diet or everyone should do the ketogenic diet. That's why we're recommending this very balanced diet. And we're working to really bolster the immune system, support your healthy cells throughout treatment as well. If you are interested, and maybe if you or a loved one is going through cancer treatment and you're curious if the ketogenic diet could be utilized as a tool, then we would love to work with you and speak with you and see if it could be appropriate.
Great answer. Okay, I'm going to try my best to answer really quick a couple of questions. There's a question about, so high quality and properly fermented sourdough bread won't affect blood sugar? And my answer to that is, hey, how much of this are you eating? What are you eating it with? Are you stressed out? Are you going to be able to move your body after you eat it? Just one food, I can't say that this is going to spike your blood sugar or not. Amazing. High quality sourdough bread. That sounds absolutely fantastic. And I still don't recommend that you eat the whole loaf in one sitting and just sit around, you know? It's important to have a balanced meal with it. Maybe have some hummus, some broccoli sprouts on there would be fantastic. And this goes in alignment with the question, do you approve of Ezekiel bread? Yes, as we went over in that slide, the Ezekiel bread does have a fantastic 5-to-1 carbohydrate to fiber ratio. It doesn't have any added sugar, and the ingredients in there are sprouted whole grains. So yeah, I approve the Ezekiel bread.
Great. I'd love to answer. I see some questions about tea in the morning and breaking a fast, or tea in the evening. So Catherine asked, is herbal chamomile tea okay in the evening within the 14-hour window? And it is, because it's, it doesn't have any caffeine, so it won't affect your cortisol levels. And as long as you don't add anything to it, like honey, any sweetener, herbal teas generally don't have any effect if it's just water, because they don't have any calories. So that should be okay. And green tea, Bernice asked, does green tea break your fast in the mornings? Generally, it should not if you add nothing. However, some people might react in a way because it has a little caffeine. It could increase your cortisol, which could potentially increase your insulin levels. I'd love to hear what you have to say, Jessica and Katie, on that, because it can be very individualized, but it does have very low caffeine, and it also contains L-theanine. So that generally also keeps your nervous system calm, which is why teas are generally more well tolerated than coffee, because coffee doesn't have L-theanine naturally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely.
Great answer.
Okay, just wanted to add one more detail to my last answer about fasting, or I was talking about the ketogenic diet. So there was a question, doesn't fasting promote ketones? Yes, absolutely. That is your fuel source when you are fasting. Your body is going to shift into a ketogenic state for those. Really, for most people, out of the 5 days, it's just 2, maybe 2.5 days. So the idea with the fasting mimicking diet is that it's cyclical. It's not every day. you're not shifting from the fasting mimicking diet into a hardcore keto diet and your ketos are just cruising at really high levels. The idea is that you're going to have this little bump in ketones, dropping glucose, which is going to make the cancer cells really uncomfortable. And then the idea is to integrate the complex carbohydrates back in so that the ketones come down. And then once again, maybe you do the fasting mimicking diet at a certain frequency that is advised for you. And then you have this little bump in ketones, maybe every few weeks or every other month, something like that, because we want to keep the cancer cells on their toes. So not using glucose as a source, but then also not providing them with an abundance of ketones to just be bathed in. There was one other question about green juice and also lemon, grapefruit, red pepper, orange, carrot, apple juice. So those are two separate situations. A green juice that is 100% greens, absolutely no fruit, is likely not going to lead to a blood sugar spike. However, it potentially could. In that situation, I would recommend maybe testing your glucose levels using a glucometer or a continuous glucose monitor, because there is no fiber. And so essentially you're stripping away all the fiber. It's just going to be the carbohydrates. There's going to be very little protein in hardly any fat, zero fat probably in a green juice. But I would say there are an abundance of nutrients. So that could be something to integrate with a meal. Because again, if you pair carbs with fiber, fat, and protein, it's going to slow down the digestion. So I would recommend, if you really love your green juice, pair it with your breakfast, so that you can benefit from those. A juice that has grapefruit and orange and carrot and apple, these are all going to be, just thinking back to the slide that Eva showed with the whole fruit versus the fruit juice, these are all going to contribute to a rise in glucose. They are going to be richer in sugar, especially combining all of those all together. If you're having it on an empty stomach, it probably is spiking your glucose. Unfortunately, we are 3 minutes past the end time here, so that concludes our presentation today. But thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you learned something and that you're able to utilize it in your daily life, and you can apply what you learned and share with friends and family. Thank you everyone for joining us, and be on the lookout. We will be announcing our next webinar soon. Have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you everyone for joining.